Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mark. I would have done a presentation for you might have heard about regarding presentation of data in the PhD or in research in general. Today my talk is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a bit more practical. So it's all about confronting the conference. It's a practical approach to conducting presentations and speech skills. One of the most important things about research, even if it's not just research itself, is presenting your work and being sure to communicate what your findings are in a clear and concise way. I have over a decade of experience in speech and drama, and as such, I wanted to share some of my tips and skills that might be able to help you in your journey in presenting research and so on in the future. Okay, so there are 5 parts to the presentation today. I'll talk to you a little bit about a conference structure, so generally how does a conference go, what's in it, and what to expect. We'll talk a bit about how to practice, so what do we do before we go to the conference, get ready for our presentation. We'll then talk about presenting itself and what we can do to make sure we're heard and our information is clear. We'll talk a bit about the follow-up, so right after the presentation, what's the best thing to do and what's the best strategies for you. And then at the end, we're going to wrap it all up by turning these all into, let's say, rule of thumbs. So some kind of quick, snappy quotes you can take away that you can use to make your presentations that much better. Okay, so the conference itself. How do conferences work and what can I expect to be there? So at a conference, there are typically several parallel sessions, which are like groups of talks that take place simultaneously in different rooms. You can imagine that like my talk right here is going on now in this room, and perhaps in the room right next to you or down the hall, there can be another presentation going on at the same time. So oftentimes conferences will have lots of different talks running at the same time in different rooms. You'll usually receive a conference schedule in advance, which will help you to plan which sessions you'd like to attend and where they're located. So a good thing to do before you go into the conference is have a look at what talks are going to go on happen, what rooms they're going to be in, and to be sure to be at those rooms on time. Each of these sessions or each of these talks is usually led by a session chair, whose role is to manage the time, ensure all the speakers get a chance to present their work, and to facilitate asking questions from the audience, similar to how Seamus is running the SPUR meetings here. And throughout the conference, there'll be scheduled breaks and lunches, which are really, really valuable opportunities to network, connect with fellow attendees, and engage in interesting discussions. We'll get a bit back into that in just a moment. For an example of what a typical conference structure might look like, this is a conference that I recently attended in Bologna. You'll see that there are several sessions on at the same time. A lot of them are on around 10:30 or 11 a.m. And you get to pick and choose which you'd like to go to. So as I said before, you'll get this in advance. And the best thing for you to do when you're preparing for the conference is just to make note of what rooms you have to be in to listen to the talks you're interested in. It's a very, very valuable opportunity to do this. Okay, so enough about the conference itself. Let's talk about how we get ready for it. How do we present our stuff? So the first thing is about practice. How can we prepare for the presentation and the conference? Well, there's 4 main things I want to talk about here. First, which is very obvious, is to practice your presentation several times using a stopwatch. Timing is very, very important at conferences, as you'll often be given a certain bit of time that you're allowed to speak within. I always suggest trying to time each section individually to avoid rushing through the final parts, so that you're not just talking about all of the introduction, and then by the time you get to your results, you have to speed through things. It's better to take a little bit of time off each individual section rather than to cut everything from one. Now, you should also be aware that not always will you have a presentation of a stopwatch in front of you or anything like that, but just to practice it a couple of times without the stopwatch to get an idea, and check the stopwatch after to see if you're in the right range for speaking. And also, as an aside, feel free to bring your phone up to the stage and use that as your stopwatch. No one at presentations, especially session chairs, mind. They'll actually be happy that you're there sticking to the time. The next point about practice is to aim to rehearse without relying on PowerPoint's presenter notes. So these are the things that you'll often see at the bottom of the screen. And while they're really useful, lots of conferences actually don't support this feature. So you might have your presentation there on the day, but you might not be able to access your presenter notes. So what I suggest is it's important to be comfortable presenting directly from your slides. Remembering, slides are a tool, not the full story. So feel free to speak about the slides and use the slide itself as kind of your prompt to help you understand what should I say here without having to rely on the notes on the screen. On the day of your talk, you should always visit the room where you're going to be presenting. This is important because you can familiarize yourself with the space, both making you more confident and comfortable, and more so, you'll know how loud and how, essentially how loud you have to talk for that particular room. If it's a large room, you should practice projecting your voice to the back so someone can hear it there. And if it's a smaller room, you can be ready to lower your tone in that sense too. So always getting a good idea of the space before going in is key. Finally, practicing in front of your friends or colleagues and asking them to pose questions. So usually if your friends are going to be there helping you, they'll have some questions about your presentation, they might not know something, and oftentimes the questions they ask might be some of the first questions you'll be asked in your conference. So it's always good to practice with your friends, get them to ask you questions too. Okay, so the presentation itself. How can I present my work effectively and confidently? So it's perfectly acceptable, as I said before, to place your phone on the table in front of you with the stopwatch running. As a matter of fact, I have a stopwatch behind my laptop now just to keep track of things. This can be helpful in a way to keep track of your timing during the presentation and make sure you give enough time to every important section rather than speeding up at the end. When speaking, project your voice towards the back of the room. Try to reach the person sitting the very furthest away. And this doesn't necessarily mean being louder, but rather speaking with clarity and intention. So being sure to punctuate things correctly and making sure that you are just to be aware of where the first person is. You should maintain a natural speaking pace. Don't be afraid to use pauses, as they give your audience time to absorb what you're saying. So if there's an important result you want to make a note of, having a pause like this is okay. It draws attention to the previous sentence. Pauses aren't necessarily a bad thing. You should just use them carefully and with intention. If you're unsure what to do with your hands during presentations, the best thing to do is put one hand in your pocket and use the other one to gesture. You can use it to point at different parts of a slide, and it can help you to appear more relaxed and purposeful in your delivery. Oftentimes when people are presenting, they'll have two hands out in front of them, and this can be an issue because they might not know what to do with both. Whereas if you have one relaxed, you can use the other one to point and to articulate things. So that might be good if you feel you might fidget with your hands or whatever it may be. When presenting, it's important to look at every person in the audience for around 3 seconds. Psychology shows that it will actually make the person feel like they're being personally addressed in the audience, and it helps them to remember to talk a little bit better as well. Now, obviously, I can't do that today given the I'm online, but you can imagine that if you're in person, it's always good to look at everyone in the audience for a bit of time to make sure they feel addressed and they feel that they're being they can connect more with the talk, let's say. If you want a good example of all these presentation skills I would have mentioned before, I really recommend you go onto YouTube and look up the presentation of the first iPhone by Steve Jobs. No matter what you might think of him as a person, because there's a lot you can say about him as a person, he was a really, really good presenter. And I absolutely advise you to go have a look at that presentation, have a look at what I talked about today, and just see where that happens in that talk. Okay, great. You prepared for your talk, you've given your speech, you've presented your information. What do we do now? Right after the presentation, when you're being asked questions, what do we do? Well, as I said, audience members may have questions about your research or offer suggestions for future directions. So they might say, actually, I thought this was really good, but maybe you could look into this or change this. So what I always recommend doing is bring a small notebook and a pen to your presentation. You can put it beside your phone as you're presenting, and then take quick notes afterwards to follow up on to see how your research can be improved. No one at a conference is necessarily out there to get you. Usually they're there just to help. So always make notes of what people might advise and recommend. After your talk, it's really common for someone to approach you for a brief conversation just to see what your work is, talk to you a little bit more about that. And if this happens, it's really valuable to consider joining them for lunch or coffee, as these informal chats can lead to really valuable discussions or even potential collaborations. As a matter of fact, as I said, I'm out in Rome at the moment on research placement, and that came as a result of talking to someone at lunch over after a presentation that I've given. So this isn't just advice that I might have come up with off the out of the blue. Rather, it's actually stuff that does genuinely work in practical settings. So if someone does come up to you after to talk about the work that you're doing after your presentation, be sure to go to lunch with them during the conference, have a chat, and see where things might go. And beyond your own presentation, make a point to attend others. Take notes, ask questions, and engage with speakers. Not only will this deepen your understanding and inspire your own research, there's always something to learn from everyone, I like to say, but it's also a great way to connect with others in the field. So as I said, with that conference plan at the beginning, make sure to know where you want to go and be sure to follow up as well and ask people about their own research. There might be good opportunities there in the future. Okay, the final section. So what are some things I've noticed myself going to academic conferences? These are the things I would have noticed. Maybe they're a bit more anecdotal than anything, but important regardless. Okay, so most people at your presentation want the best for you and are interested in hearing your perspective. Because keep in mind, they could go to other presentations instead if they wanted to. So don't worry about being judged. People will have questions only because they want to know more about your great work. Some people will ask tricky questions, and there will be times you don't know how to answer them. If I had any for every time I didn't know how to answer a question, I don't know if I'd be still doing research. Let's say I might be a millionaire. But it pays to have good offhand phrases here to address the query in a professional way. So for example, if you don't know something, just be honest, because there's an opportunity to learn there. You could say something like, this is out of the scope of my study. I'm not so sure, but that's something that could be investigated further. That's interesting. What do you think? All these kind of phrases. Just have them in your back pocket ready in the case that maybe something is confusing. And don't be shy about that. Not everyone knows everything at these conferences. So admitting when you don't know something is an opportunity to learn. Best to do is be honest. And finally, you're not expected to know every single thing in your area. So long as you know about the work you are presenting, don't feel stressed, don't feel the need to know everything in the field, because honestly, no one does. Not even the top researchers in computer science, in biology, chemistry, English, whatever it might be, no one knows everything. So don't feel that you're expected to do so. And that's about it. I think all the time is good. I'll stop that stopwatch I was saying there.